Alright everybody, this video is going to be maybe 25-30 minutes long. This is going to be a primer in the sequencer interface. I'm going to give you guys this file as well. You guys will have a copy of this file, so you guys will be able to play around with it. In my version of it, I have Lumen disabled because you guys know my machine can't really handle Lumen. So I have that, and I've reduced engine scalability by way of reducing the resolution scale to 50%. I had a couple of questions as to what that actually does. When you reduce the resolution scale, what it does is it reduces the resolution of textures after a certain distance. That's more or less kind of a cheat move if you want to be able to here, I'll show you. If you want to be able to reduce the amount of information that's on screen, more or less the resolution scale is what's going to give you a lot of leeway into that. Because if you set it to epic, as you can see, watch the difference in the background. There is a small difference in the quality of the textures that I can see that's perceptible to me. But when setting the resolution scale at 100%, you'll get full screen percentage. One of the things that you can also diminish if you want to be able to run Lumen, but also need a little bit more horsepower, is you can reduce the screen percentage to say 50% or lower. As you can see, this really degraded my textures in the distance. Watch what happens at 100, and you can go higher than that. Now, when you go higher than that, you get ultra resolution or ultra high resolution. You don't want to do that unless you're taking screenshots. We'll discuss that later when we're talking about the post-process volume later today. But essentially, if you need more power, you can degrade the quality of the textures just enough, and that's what I'm going to be doing in this because I want this to be nice and fast. I'll probably do 75, so it's not that bad. I'm going to degrade the quality of my textures. It should be visible on my stream that the quality is a little bit lower, but that's kind of a good way to approach it. Don't change your FOV, just don't, and don't change your far view plane. I find that being incredibly problematic. That has to do with the nearness and farness of the game camera. Don't worry about it too much. Like I said, all I'm doing is reducing the screen percentage so that I get reasonably fast render rates here. As you can see, it's still a little bit slow because that's just kind of the nature of the beast. If you need even more speed, like I've talked about in the past, you want to just go ahead and change your scalability, and then we'll just set this down to about 50%. And that'll give you a little bit more speed. But the goal here is that I'm going to try to keep this as brisk as possible. So give me about 35 minutes to 45 minutes, and we'll talk about the sequencer interface, and we'll talk about sequences as a whole. So one of the important things that level designers can use sequencer for is essentially creating overview. We used to call them matinees. Basically, whenever you go into a level, what happens? Usually you get a camera, it shows the area, there's usually some narration, there's some dialogue happening, so for anyone who's played Horizon or played any of the Zelda games, they usually show sequences of the area that you're in, like the enemies fighting each other or cooking food or something. That's just something that we do to kind of showcase the play space of the player so that they have opportunities to see and do things. So in this particular case, I'm just going to kind of casually fly around here. I might lower the engine scalability even more, but this is slow because I'm also capturing at the same time. So a few of you have seen this before. Some of you haven't, but you'll get a copy of this, so you'll be able to kind of see it and understand what's going on here. So it's a relatively small scene. It is a relatively small scene with good geometry, and it's well built, and it's put together to kind of showcase a kind of a hangar setup, right? There's a hangar, nothing moves, nothing opens up, it's just static. So the goal of using a program like Sequencer, and I say program specifically because when we're talking about Sequencer, we are talking about using another program that's built into UE5 in this particular case. UE4 people, yours is more or less the same. It's going to be in the same-ish place. And this allows us to kind of build cinematics. Now, This is a much bigger rabbit hole. An entire course, as I've mentioned before for other things, could be taught on Sequencer. Animation students and people who are familiar with animation in UE4, UE5, you can actually also script character movements. So for example, if the character walks in from off screen, if you have that, you can actually create a spline and then, create the actions needed and then play audio at the same time, so that you have like some kind of action sequence or dialogue sequence or storytelling sequence. There's also the capacity to manipulate the character or manipulate any of the characters that you have using the rig. We do have a custom rig in UE5. We're not quite there yet. We'll get there when we get to the skeletal mesh stuff, when we talk about animating rigs. I'm not an animator, guys. I've told you guys that before in the past, and I'm going to hold on to it. I don't think every professor is going to be the trove of absolute knowledge for everything. I'm going to come forward and admit that I've only ever really used Sequencer to make cinematic flybys and to make cinematic sequences with some narration to showcase, hey, and the narration was added on YouTube, in another program. So I exported that and I added the narration to it after the fact. So in reality, that's my use case for it. And since we're in level design, it is important, or in the level design portion of this class, it is important to understand what you can do. Now recognize that there are limits to what I know about using things like animations and the rig, the control rig, etc., related to Sequencer. What this is supposed to be is a primer so that you guys who are working on your level design stuff can expand on it. If there is enough interest, I will do some further research, and I'm not terrible at animations. I know how to use them because as a technical artist, you have to be able to integrate just about anything and anywhere. But I don't animate. I don't animate very well. Yes, I can keyframe, and that's a completely different thing to me. But when you're animating characters or animating, scenes and sequences, you already have to have a bunch of character montages, and you already have to have a bunch of information that you can script into the character's behavior. And from there, all Sequencer really does is just kind of records the action using a high-resolution cinematic game camera and goes from there. So, again, as we go forward, just kind of bear that in mind. This is purely a self-contained, very simple approach to understanding cinematics. In the next video, what we're going to be doing is I'm going to show you the various tools that you can use with the Cine camera, and I'm going to show you things like the lock-on constraint. I'm going to show you things like the rig. I'm going to show you the appropriate setup. And I'm going to kind of approach this as I've improved myself in the past year or so from knowing Sequencer somewhat to knowing it a little better. Unfortunately, because of how much stuff I have to have on screen, I'm going to have to kill my camera here pretty shortly. I am losing some frames here, so if you see my hands kind of drift around, it's because I'm, again, recording and running Unreal at the same time can use a significant amount of power, and I'm currently unable to access a second computer which does my capturing. So that's just going to be something that I'm going to need to deal with for now, but it's worth looking into in the future. But anyways, for now we're just going to deal with it and we're going to go forward. Alright, so you guys will have this scene, and I'm going to go ahead and disable my camera and I'll talk about Sequencer and cinematics. Okay. Meanwhile, I'm going to crack open a cold one and we'll get started here. This is Monster Energy. Okay, let's go. Alright, for the majority of you, this is going to be a new endeavor for most of you. Some of you already have some experience using the cinematics, using Sequencer, and some of you have dabbled in your own. This is more like formally showing it so that I can be sure that everybody has at very least a primer. Some of you guys are still struggling with some of the other stuff, but this will be fine. So, creating your first cinematic is actually pretty easy depending on what you're trying to kind of get accomplished. In this particular demo, I'm going to showcase the tools, and I'll give you all the tips and kind of understanding for how this works. Other people can expand on this, including the Epic Games library for how to use cinematics. Most of their recordings are in UE4. Mine is mostly toned to UE5. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to go ahead and open up your cinematics. Now, we have an add level sequence and we have an add master sequence. A level sequence is, how can I explain this? A master sequence, for example, is more or less like a rack that has several sequences that can go into it. Your master sequence is kind of where you put and store all of your level sequences. A single level sequence might be good as a single asset, especially if you're trying to make just kind of a simple cinematic. But if you're trying to shoot multiple shots and combine multiple angles and multiple cameras, I find that adding a master sequence is a little bit better by and large. Let's go ahead and add a master sequence here, and I'm going to essentially accept the default here. This controls a number of shots that you intend to have in the scene. Let's say your boss tells you, hey, I need to have a certain amount of, I need to have 5 shots of this scene, and you need to utilize all those cameras in order for those shots to be complete. Or if you have a budget for a certain amount of shots, that would be where you would set your shot to. I'm going to go ahead and call this, I don't know, hanger. So I usually either put a suffix or a prefix saying sequence, that way I know what it is. I generally leave the suffix for master alone, mostly because this is just the master sequence is going to be called this. So I'd give it a name and leave it as master. You can change the base path if you'd like, but this is just going to make a folder for you. We're not going to duplicate any sequences. We're not going to add any array elements. We're not going to change the duration here. We'll fix that all when we get there. All of this is just a default. Shots, shots, shots. All of this is just a default, but we can go ahead and change it later once we actually start changing the naming convention, the documentation. We don't have to worry about this. This is mostly just for production, especially if your producer has a very specific amount of shot numbers or a very specific sequence tracker that they're using. Back in the day when we were using Tactic, shots would come with 4 separate prefixes before the name of the shot, and so it was very difficult to read which shot you were looking at unless you understood the nomenclature. You don't have to worry about that, and you don't have to worry about the FBX settings. That's just a separate element for tracking. Don't worry about that. So accept the default, make sure you change the name to something useful, and go ahead and hit Create Master Sequence. Alright, for a majority of you guys, your sequencer is going to pop up like this. It's just going to pop up in the middle of the screen, and it's going to be kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and it's going to pop open like so. I'm just going to maximize it for now so I can talk about the different elements that are in it. And for those of you guys who have any kind of motion graphics experience, this should be pretty easy to understand. Now, in this particular sequence, it's created our overall clip. This is what the camera is looking at right now. It's showcasing our shots. We've got a timeline editing tool over here. We have our timeline graph over here. We have the world context here, which is basically if this is going to play in the world. This is mostly for blueprinting purposes. Don't worry about that. We have a sequencer, or excuse me, we have a save. Sorry, sequencer. We have a save. We have a search function, especially when you start getting a lot of shots. We have a new camera creator, although you can do this manually or create one when you create a new shot. We have the render function, which renders this to a movie or video. This is for outputting. We have a series of actions. This is essentially the same as your right-click in the world setting. You have your save functions, you have some of your advanced transforms, etc., etc. We have different view options. I don't generally mess around with this too much. This shows different things. This is very similar to a window. We have playback options, which controls everything that's on screen down here, but we can change that in these locations anyways. We have just the key, or rather we can create keys from here. This is kind of useful. I'll cover this one in the future. Come on, unclick that, please. We have an auto key setting for those of you guys who are familiar with animation. I generally don't like to auto key because it can get a little scary, but essentially every time you make a change with auto key turned on, it is going to change anything the moment that you append or change a value on the frame that you're located on. And of course, this is, how can I explain this? This is the thing that prevents you from changing or warning you that you can or can't change something in a level or in a sequence. By default, it's going to allow you to do all edits. If someone tells you to only edit the level stuff, which means at the camera position, etc., that's going to be what you're going to want to do. If somebody only wants you to edit the sequence, which means that stuff in the sequencer without moving the camera positions or moving any of the elements in the world, that's what it'll be set as. But generally speaking, I would leave it as allow all edits for now. Let's go click that off. Snapping is good. Leave that on. This is deceiving. It's not actually an options button. This just scales that out. We have our FPS, and we have a curve editor. I'm not super great at the curve editor, though I might just showcase some of it in a little bit, just to showcase what the curve editor is supposed to do. We have our timeline, and we have our shots camera over here on the left. Pretty straightforward. We have the name of our master over here. We have our shots, and we have our overall time graph with how much time we're supposed to use in terms of frames. Now, generally speaking, if we're going to be recording game footage, you can choose between 30 and 60 FPS. I'm going to set my master for 60 FPS, and I'm going to go ahead and change my time scale here. This shows us by default in frames. I'm going to change it to seconds. As you can see, the top bar here changed to how many seconds our scene currently is. And because our camera does not have an in and out or start or finish, it's currently set to about a little over 24 seconds. Let's see the exact amount of time here. It's about 25 seconds worth of frame. This can be expanded and shortened, but as you can see, we have a bunch of different shots in here based on the 5 that we created. Remember, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let's see, let me drag this out. I'm going to go ahead and drag out the timeline here, and I'm going to set it at about 30 seconds. It doesn't have to be a perfect science, but this is going to fit all of the shots in the sequence. As you can see, each different shot has a different camera that is going to be usable. In my particular case, I personally will set my default to only 1 shot at a time, but in this particular case, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the last 3 shots, and I'll have my shot 1-0 and my shot 2-0. Now ignore the naming convention. This is just the default naming convention for sequencer, but it should work pretty well for you. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. And the next thing I want to do is I want to dock it. I'm going to dock mine down here at the bottom. Now you can dock it wherever you want, wherever you feel the most comfortable. And I'm going to start editing some of my viewport so that I can see things like my camera at the same time while I'm able to see the viewport. Now this is where your stuff might slow down pretty intensely if your machine is already on the cusp for lumen. Again, just utilize the tricks that I've already shown you to get that speed back. But there's no real obligation to be 100% viewport power if you're going to set up your cameras. So it's up to you. I'm going to leave my cameras on for now. We'll check something here real quick. Alright, everything looks good. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to set up my camera so that I can actually see what's going on the screen. Let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and, where is that again? Let's go to Layouts, and I'm going to set up the double pane here. Cool. I'm going to set my left one to perspective, and I'm going to immediately change a few settings in it. I'm going to make sure that Allow Cinematic Control is turned off. Allow Cinematic Control allows you to select the camera from that viewport. Your default viewport, for example, the one on the right, automatically has Allow Camera Control on. It is generally a good idea to disable your camera control for the screen that you are going to be editing or making changes in. The reason why is if you select allow camera control for both of these, you could run into a situation where you can control the camera and accidentally make changes in both of these screens. One camera or one scene should be able to be visually apparent to what the camera is doing, and the other one should be set up so that no camera control is hijacked. I'm going to go ahead and lock my viewport to one of my shots here. So what am I going to do here? I'm going to go ahead and double click on my shot here, the first shot on the left, and this opens up the sequencer. As you can see, we're in this particular shot, and you can navigate between which shots you can see by changing. It's taking a sec to load, sorry about that. By changing which shot you're going to be shooting from, which is nice to kind of be able to navigate. I'm going to go ahead and select the first shot. I'm going to let that load up, and I'll explain everything over here. But first and foremost, I'm going to go ahead and click Lock Cinecamera Actor to selected viewport. I'm going to make sure that this viewport is selected over here, and I'm going to lock the Cinecamera Actor to it. And as you can see, the Cinecamera Actor has been locked in that particular scene. And I can move around in my other scene. Whoops. It's a little slow. You know what, guys? It's a little slow, unfortunately. It's because I'm recording. Let me go ahead and drop my engine scalability to low. It'll be fine. There we go. So the nice thing is you can see how if I am driving in this particular camera setting, it's really funny if you watch it in the background. Oh, I lost it. Let me move back into position here. If you look over on the left screen, let me make sure I'm looking at the right thing. Here we go. You can see that the camera is flying around, and that's essentially what you need that particular screen for. This is just one format to do, one way to do it, especially if you like manually driving your camera or positioning it. It's just a good tool to have. This immediately locks you to the camera actor, and then you have a couple of different, ignore the stream pull thing, you have a couple of different settings that show up on this viewport. Some of you guys have seen this viewport before. Let me go ahead and maximize this so I can show you. Over here, when you are inside of a Cinecamera, you have the option to stop piloting an actor within the current viewport. Essentially what this does is it kicks you out of the camera. While you have this button lit up, this is what you are seeing. You are piloting the camera that you are inside of. This is not always an ideal solution, especially, let me minimize this again, especially if you like to manually edit the camera. Lock viewport to camera cuts locks the viewport to what the camera is seeing, but as you can see, we can't modify or edit it at all. In order to edit the camera, we now have to position it manually, and we edit the game camera in the game view window. So over here is my game view. For example, I'm seeing through my Cinecamera actor right there. Let me deselect, select it again, there we go. And we can see how the camera is updating over on the left. Or excuse me, over on the right. Alright, so we have the basics of setting up the sequencer here set up for us. Again, it really just depends on what you like. If you like having access to the camera, this is really nice for if you need to kind of go somewhere and set up the camera in such a way that is going to kind of give us the best kind of cinematic view. I personally like this way. People will like this way as well if they want to just be able to, for example, you can see how I'm locking and unlocking the camera. So I'm inside the camera. Where did I put that Cinecamera? There you are. Oh, I'm in the wrong Cinecamera actor. I apologize. I accidentally made a copy of it. Whoops. Let me back that up a few times. So I've unlocked both the cameras. I did not actually copy the camera. They actually labeled this a little confusing. I didn't manage to read that because of the background. So our Cine Camera Actor and our Camera Cuts Actor are two separate camera actors, but they work in conjunction to record a similar cut. So it doesn't really matter which one you're recording. As you can see, the Cine Camera Actor has its own track and can be modified and record its own elements, but so can the Camera Cuts. It just really depends on what you want to work with. So if you like moving the Cine Camera Actor, you can absolutely move the Cine Camera Actor to your liking. Or if you like working with the Camera Cuts, you can absolutely move the Camera Cuts camera wherever you'd like. Make sure I've got that selected. Oops. There we go. And move that. They are both contributing to the same camera, the same shot, depending on which one you want to use. So for example, I can set this camera up over here, and then if I really want to, make sure I got my camera cut selected here. That's my Cine Camera Actor setup, so let me grab my Camera Cuts camera. Make sure I've selected. It's always good to have your details panel open, or your world outliner. This is what helps you find it. It's going to be labeled as your Cine Camera Actor. And that icon there just showcases that it's live. This looks like the correct camera. There we go. So it just really depends on what you want to do for your setup here. Okay. I actually just realized that this scene had an extra Cine Camera Actor. I'm going to delete that so that you guys don't get it when you guys get this file. That's my bad. So again, just to quickly recap, I was wondering why I had two Cine cameras in the scene when I only made one. Again, we have a Cine Camera Actor over here, and if you want to be able to drive the camera manually, click on this little button so that the viewport is lit up so that you have access to this camera over here, and you can see that the camera is flying around. And if you want to view it from the Camera Cuts camera, which means that the camera is in control, or rather the viewport is in control of the camera, we can just go ahead and manually place this however we feel like is going to be useful. It really just depends on kind of what your overall style of cinematography is. Personally, I like to manually place my cameras. We can see that the scene updates whenever we get an opportunity, whenever it gets an opportunity. So if you need to update it, that's all well and good, but we're actually able to see what's happening over here anyways. This is only just kind of useful when you have it set up to full screen. But since we have two screens, I should probably disable that. One of the things I think is going to be useful for people is figuring out how to get rid of that, especially because this takes up a lot of real estate. I don't know if it's a bug, but sometimes if you toggle this, let's go back to allow cinematic control and disallow cinematic control, that might disappear. Or the other way that I've discovered, and I'm not sure why this is on by default, I think it's because it doesn't read the second window, or it's an order of operations thing. I'm going to go ahead and select Cinematic Viewport, and then I'm going to go back to the default viewport, and then I'm going to make sure that Allow Cinematic Control is disabled, and then if I unclick and click on this element right here, we can still select our Cine Camera Actor, but as you can see now we don't get the little preview. That's something that is a little bit kind of weird to explain. It's kind of the weird iniquities of Unreal. You'll probably get used to it or not. Again, what I've done here is very similar to just kind of bumping the viewport. If you still get this tiny little cinematic viewport and you want to get rid of that, I know it was weird because it was trying to update while it was also trying to update both windows. Just go to Cinematic Viewport temporarily, go back to default viewport, and then make sure that Allow Cinematic Control is turned off. There's something about cinematic control being turned off by default in that second window that makes that little extra viewport come up. Since we already have it up anyways, like so, it shouldn't pop up over here. For some reason in the camera cuts, it likes to pop up sometimes. This is really all we need. Alright, so that's set up appropriately. Let's go ahead now. Oh, forgot I saved. Let's go ahead now and take a look at some of the navigation for this particular viewport. As you can see, my Cinecamera actor came back. Again, if you want to just temporarily disable it, you can just go ahead and pop that in. There is a way to permanently disable it in the project settings, but I'm not a huge fan of it. Let me go ahead and try to remember where it is. I believe it's in Editor Preferences. And then if we scroll all the way down to Viewports, and it should be under Look and Feel. I believe it's Preview Selected Cameras. This is going to be something that you can turn off. This is a live picture-in-picture. Again, I generally leave mine on, but it's just kind of an annoying thing where people don't really like it if they already have their screen set up. If yours keeps popping up and you don't like it set up, go ahead and disable Preview Selected Cameras. Oops, my bad. Since we already have a second camera set up, just make sure that you re-enable it if you're going to be editing in a single window. Generally speaking, again, for novices, leave it on for now. Yes, it's a mild annoyance, but you'll deal with it. It'll be okay. All right. So let's go ahead and actually think about how our UI is going to work down here. So earlier we changed the FPS and we changed the time compatibility over to seconds. If we hold down Control and zoom in and out, we can actually zoom in and out of our timeline here. And we can actually move some elements of our timeline. For example, I'm going to extend the frame duration to about 12 seconds. I can also extend the clip beyond that. There we go. Now what this is the time code for the length of the master. So right now we are in shot 001. If I go back to here, you'll see that our overall time for this shot is a little over 4 seconds. If I move this and I scale this out to about 12 seconds, cool, and we go back to the actual shot, you'll see that that red line has moved. What that red jaggedy line is supposed to mean is that in the master, let's say in the master you set up shot 1 is going to be 8 seconds. Shot 2 is going to be, oh, maybe we'll do a transition with shot 2 being, I don't know, 8 seconds, something like that, right? We can set that up in here so that each individual shot has the appropriate amount of time, and this is what this master line is supposed to be. This red line that I'm able to drag edits the final time of the cut, and everything beyond that is trimmed off, so you can even make additional trims in here. Just go ahead and make sure that all your lines are kind of synced up. If you need to move your master line, extend the amount of time that you have inside of the actual master. You can reach the master by clicking, if you are inside the shot 1, you can reach the master by clicking on the name of the file folder that's holding the sequence, and then extend the time of your sequence to the appropriate amount of time. This is set up for 12 seconds. I'm going to set up a blank spot here so that I can make sure that I can keep track of this. And then we can go back inside that shot. Cool. Alright. The next thing that I want to talk about is some of the camera settings. So if you don't have your camera selected, go ahead and click on your Cinecamera actor and go into the Details panel. Your Cinecamera actor is going to be located over in your World Outliner. However, if you don't have it selected, go ahead and select it here, and make sure that you have your camera locked in the format that you like. You can go ahead and lock it to the viewport if you want quick selections or quick movements. I'm going to make probably a little timeline of us kind of zooming past, kind of zooming into the jet here. So I'm just going to go ahead and place my camera, and then I'm going to go ahead and change my perspective to the camera cuts so that when I need to make some changes to the camera itself, I can go ahead and do that. See, as you can see, my Cinecamera Actor window is back. That's fine. You can just kind of ignore it for the time being. So I'm just going to place my camera according to what I want. That's just a visual bug where the camera tries to outrun the frame. Don't worry about that. It won't show up in the actual recording. I'm just going to kind of showcase the hanger here. Let's move that camera way back. There we go. Alright, let's take a look at some of the camera settings here. So, the camera settings are going to be located in your details panel, but also your camera settings, if you scroll down with the middle mouse wheel, are going to be located over here. Both of these settings reflect what is happening over here. So one of the nice things about the viewport here is that these settings are available on both sides, and they do affect each other. For example, I don't like the fact that they're in a different order than they are over here, and you have different settings that only show up in certain conditions, but let's go ahead and go down the list of the ones on the left, and then hopefully illuminate some of the functions. The three functions available by default from the camera component, or rather by the Cinecamera Actor, is camera component, which if we look over here, clicks directly on the camera component. I haven't gotten an opportunity to talk about nested componentry. This is essentially that different components live inside of a scene component. And as you can see, these values are set to 0. Do not, under any circumstances, move the camera component. Do not. What this does is it moves it offset. This is its central offset from where it's located in the world. If you move anything, you want to move the camera actor. So stay away from the camera component. Camera aperture, and it's going to be very difficult to see what's happening here. Let's see if I can force it by looking through the actual camera. And I'm going to see if I can position someplace a little closer. Okay. I think that'll be okay. Let's see if I can get it. So controlling camera aperture is very similar to controlling the aperture of actual film. It essentially controls how much of the scene that you want to be in focus. Lower aperture means that a lower amount of the scene is going to be in focus, and high aperture means a high amount of the scene is going to be in focus. However, since we don't have a focus ramp, it can be very difficult to tell the difference. As you can see, as I modify the current focus aperture, it doesn't really affect anything. See if I can get anything to hop up here. We're not even getting much change in terms of the aperture because it has a maximum amount. I'll demonstrate aperture when we actually get a little bit of an opportunity to do some more stuff here. The nice thing is that you can reset its values. And be careful over here. Does anyone see these little buttons over here on the right? These are keying buttons where you can set a key for where the camera is supposed to have information put on its track. We have a current focal length, which if you edit it over here or down here, it works the same. It changes the focal length of the camera. And it's quite nice, and it's quite easy to kind of set this up. This is how you can do your dynamic zooms, and allows us to reset our focal length to default, which is quite nice. Manual focus distance is something completely different. This doesn't show up immediately over on the right. Ignore the spawn thing here. Spawn is just has to do with whether or not the camera has been spawned or not. Just kind of leave that alone. This setting, manual focus distance, is actually located underneath your manual focus settings over here. So what I did was I opened up my manual focus settings, and we're just going to move this over. And personally, I like turning on the draw debug focus plane. And currently I'm piloting the Cinecamera Actor, so I'm just going to back this up so I get this into position. And then I'm going to switch to my other camera tracking mode. Cool. Now, watch this. Manual focus distance allows you to grab a dropper. I'm going to go ahead and grab the dropper here, and I'm going to select maybe the area near the cockpit. If you have the Draw Debug Focus plane on, this actually shows you where your focus is supposed to be at, and can be incredibly useful when you are trying to figure out if you are focused on the correct element in your scene. This allows you to focus things like this also modifies things like your aperture and your focal length so that you can get a good result from your overall focus in the scene. And this can be toggled on or off. So for example, let's see if I can... It's not going to give us much of a result, unfortunately. This scene is relatively narrow and we're encased, so let's go ahead and just click on that and double check to make sure our focus debug plane is on. Oh, if it's not exact, we can always move this a little bit to kind of get a better result. Cool. And that can be set up by default, which our focus method here, set to manual, can change depending on what you're doing. We can, for example, not override, meaning that if we have a post-process volume, the post-process volume will not override settings in this camera for focus. I don't generally mess with the focus outside of the camera. We have tracking, whether or not we're tracking to a specific object, or disable the focus. Personally, manual tracking is good to leave on because you actually do have access to some of your focal settings, regardless of what the camera is actually doing. I'm going to go ahead and set the default here again. I'm going to reset the Draw Debug Focus. And if we change the tracking here, we see that we have the ability to change what the tracking focus is supposed to be depending on what the actor is supposed to be. And it can be relatively useful figuring out what that component might be if we're focused on something in the scene. Let's open up the focus settings again. Set this back to default, manual, and then I'm going to go ahead and click that, and then draw the debug plane, and then modify its position to make sure I'm in the right spot. Okay, that seems nice. Okay, I'm going to go ahead once that's set and disable the focus plane. Alright. You know, before I do that, let me actually set up a couple other things so I can showcase some elements of the camera that might be useful. Let's see if I can actually go in here and see if I can figure set up the f-stop so that you guys can see something a little bit more interesting. Man, that is a terrible cockpit. This table or this chair is not even lit up properly. Let me go ahead and reset my settings here, and let me turn on my focus plane and grab my dropper and see if I can get this again. Okay, that's pretty good. Alright, so I've got my camera set up appropriately, so I'm just kind of demonstrating something that you can do with this. Let's turn off my draw debug focus plane, and now I'm gonna go ahead and disable my low render here. I'm just going to set up to epic here. Let's see if I can reduce some of the screen space size. I'm already at 100. Set this to maybe 65. Let's see what that does. Cool. Doesn't really affect the Cine camera. Alright, so just to kind of show you an example of kind of some of the settings a little bit better, because I didn't do a really good job of that. Let me go ahead and showcase the Draw Debug plane. Okay, that's located where I want it to be. Let's actually manipulate that a little bit. So let's say that we had an actor in there. We wanted to focus on the actor. So we would kind of cut him up a little bit. Okay, let's turn that off. And keep your eye on the background here as I mess with my focus aperture here. Let me go back up. Does everybody see kind of how that effect becomes more like a vignetting, almost like a depth of field effect? I don't believe you can actually set this lower. Let's see if I can set this lower than what is prescribed. Nope. You can actually set up your camera distance, which will affect your depth of field based on the overall focal plane of your focus distance here. This is actually quite useful when it comes to setting up your camera. I'm going to go ahead and select my Cine Camera actor here. Now, some of you guys have noticed that the look at tracking is available at the Cine Camera level. This is kind of one of those things that you kind of have to look at when you are deciding what you're going to do with your camera. I'll go ahead and change the look at tracking settings in another demo after this. But again, I'm just showcasing in this video what the settings do, how they operate, and as you can see, because I had my engine scalability very low, let me go ahead and set my screen space back to 100% so you guys can see a little bit clearer. Okay. And let me go ahead and mess with those settings again. So again, we have kind of our lens settings, we have our different film backs, etc. We can change how that ramp affects the aperture distance in the back. See? And of course, different film backs will provide us with different results. For example, a 16:9 DSLR has a much different result than, say, a let's look in here. IMAX 70mm camera. Man, it looks way cooler, doesn't it? And of course, changing the aperture also has an effect on what is happening in the background as well. Not as much on certain cameras, depending on the focal length. But if we set this up appropriately, we can definitely see that there is fundamentally some amount of result in the background. Different cameras and different film backs will have a different result for what the sensor is supposed to be. This has to do mostly with trying to mimic IRL cameras. This may or may not be something that you want to do, but it's worth knowing that you can modify the camera to your liking. Personally, if I'm going to be doing any kind of cinematic work and I'm just going to do anything fun, what I'm usually going to do is I'm going to do 16:9 DSLR or 16:9 digital film, because the settings for them I find to be a little bit more what I want in terms of my general perspective. And of course, you can also change your zoom settings, for example, depending on your f-stop. Now, this gets incredibly technical. I would generally say that if you are unfamiliar with terms like f-stop, which is just a fancy term for exposure, you should stay away from these and use the universal zoom. It's totally fine. But different settings change the way that the zoom and the focal length are going to work in terms of mathematical lenses that you have set up. For example, my current focal length is set there. And then I can change my focus settings. We can double check to see if the plane is in the right position. It still is. And then we can change the aperture again. You can see that the background is a lot more out of focus than typically it was before, depending on your focal length settings. So by the default aperture, we see that the background is heavily depth of fielded, but we can change the aperture to allow more of the scene to be in the shot, depending on how clear we want the background to be. This is something like you would see in like a regular cinematic movie. This is something that you'd see if you were trying to essentially render out things in the background. This is what you see a lot in modern movies, where people in the background look really fuzzy, but people in the foreground tend to be really, really good looking and clean looking. I personally like using 16:9 DSLR, but I'm going to go ahead and undo all these settings so that we get back to kind of a default value here. There you go. As you can see, the current aperture does not affect the background as much as it profoundly should, but that gives you a good idea for how those elements work. Alright, let's go ahead and pilot the camera to a position that I think is going to be nice. I'm going to go ahead and set my scalability low again. This scene is just heavy for my machine and my recording, so I'm just going to set my engine scalability low again, and I am going to just back this up to where I think something looks good. And now I'm going to switch my camera view to selecting the camera cut itself so that I can move the camera in the viewport. Cool. Now watch this. Let me actually set this up. I'm going to go and set up a quick track here. So we have everything framed. We have everything set up in our shots. Shots. we have everything set up. Let's say we have our camera aperture set up. Everything is according to what we want. Let's go ahead and figure out how to key some things. So I'm going to go ahead, oh, cancel that. I managed to click that on accident. You can change the color of these things to kind of help you highlight what each thing is supposed to be. For example, our cine camera actor has this particular cut. This is fine. Let's go ahead and I'm going to scroll down. I'm not going to mess with the transform, rotation, or scale the rotation and scale too much, but this is kind of where you can start figuring out where your keys are supposed to be as well. I'm going to go into the details panel here, and let's look at a few things here. I'm going to go ahead and go back to I'm going to go back and set my film back to its default. It should be 69 digital film, but let's go ahead and double check. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and very quickly set up my focus setting here. Turn on my focus plane. Oh, wrong thing here. Grab my camera again, sorry. Set up my focal plane here. And make sure I'm in the camera before I do this. Oops, wrong thing. There we go. Let's grab that dropper area over there. That's fine. Now we can turn off our debug plane. So we have our actual focus distance. Let's go ahead and add a key for a few things here. And you can go ahead and key the focus as well, which is really nice. I'm going to go ahead and click this button to add a keyframe to that particular property. Or you can do that over here for the manual focus distance. Adding a key right here is as simple as clicking this button, which will give us a key on frame 1. And our location can be modified to frame 2. Now, I'm going to go ahead and move my frame here and say in 9 seconds, the camera should move over here, so you can see the ladder. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and key my location, and I'm also going to go ahead and key my new focal length. So again, I'm going to turn on my focus plane here. Okay, it looks like the focal length needs to change a little bit. Let me double check that. Oops. Focal length. That's a little sloppy. Let's see if we can zoom that in a little bit better. Alright. And now I can go ahead and key it over here or key it over here. And let's go ahead and disable our focus plane. And now we can scrub. Make sure we're actually in the camera we want to see in. Let's scroll up. Select my camera track. Let's hit play. Stop that for a sec. Let's play again. Let's go back to the front here and play again. Sorry, I had this window selected, so that's where the little thing popped up. Alright, cool. Let's pause. Let's go back to front. I'm going to go ahead and enable my scalability settings to Epic so we can see everything that's happening. And then I'm going to hit play again. Now it's going to be really slow because my computer is having trouble running this, but you can see that this is actually working according to what we want. Very nice. I'm going to set this back down so we can see this play again. Okay. So this is indicating that we have keys. As you can see, our camera component still isn't moved, and you see that our cine camera actor is where we've placed another set of keys over here. But these keys here will notify that we have elements set up below them on this particular key. So you see how the keying function works. Oh, I accidentally keyed the focal length and not the focal distance. Good thing I noticed that, because now I can very easily showcase that you can delete a key just by hitting the delete key. Go figure. We can go back, or we can go to our next frame, or we can go to our next key which is actually incredibly useful. This is going to end, and this is going to our let's set up a playback frame so we can A/B some things, and then we can do no looping if we want. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and rekey the manual focus distance. Man, why didn't you guys tell me I keyed the wrong thing? Let's double check that the manual focus distance is set in the correct location, because sometimes it changes and we didn't actually change it. So let's draw a debug focus plane. Aha! Set it in the right spot. Cool. We can overwrite that key by keying again. Cool. I'm going to set the playback to end on that frame right there. So that's what I've done with that click. And then we're going to hit play. We'll let it loop again because it's playing out the entire thing. And we'll loop the playback range. Now it's going to try to do some stuff over here, obviously, because it's not actually keyed. We've only ended it for 9 seconds. We would have to go back to the master and set our final frame to this if we wanted this to be our manual frame. Let's go ahead and disable the debug. And actually, before I keep playing here, let's go back there. I'll set this as my in. We'll go back to our master. We'll set the master range to about 9 seconds. There we go. That's pretty good. Double click that. Actually, I moved it a little too much. Let's go back. Actually, it says 9 seconds, so it's 9 seconds to me. Cool. Let's go back in here. Yep, that's set up correctly. We just need to bring in our frame a little bit to match up with our end. And then let's hit play. And now that'll loop. Now, for those of you paying attention, you see that the camera tries to slow down at the very end. We have a gentle ramp in and a gentle ramp down. I'm going to go ahead and stop the playhead real quick, and I'm going to go back to the first playhead. And I'm going to go ahead and open up my curves now. This is where the curve editor becomes useful. Watch, pay attention to the actual cinema. We have a very slow ramp up to a normal speed right about here. And then we start getting a minor slowdown, and then we stop. Maybe that's not sexy. Maybe that's not what you want. Let's go ahead and go back to the front. Let's open up our curve editor. And here are the curves for the entire scene. Let's see if I can mod. Oh, I did not mean to move those. Sorry about that. I middle mouse clicked on accident. So you see that we have access to our location, rotation, and scale. As you can see, there are no keys there, but there are keys set up on our location. Go back to the camera component. Go back to the camera actor. Do not animate the camera component. So we can see that we do have keys in various locations. These are the keys that we have selected. I'm going to select these keys. So for example, inside the camera component, we have keys on the manual focus distance. I'm going to select the first key and press the number 4, or if you right click, you can change the type of curve. I'm going to change mine to linear on both of these by pressing the 4 key, and then I'm going to go to my location, that's XYZ, and I'm just going to press 4 just to line everything up again. Cool. I'm going to hit save on that because I haven't saved in a while. And let's hit play. Now we have a very linear movement to our camera. No slowdown, no ramp down, bam. Straightforward. Or maybe we do, for example, want a ramp down at the end. We can go ahead and go back to here. The curve editor is for those of you hardcore animators who really love this kind of stuff. I'm going to go ahead and select those last ones here. Make sure they're selected. There we go. And I'm going to right click any number of them, and then we can set them to auto to ramp down a little bit. And maybe on this particular last key, I want this to ramp down. Oh, don't want that too far. Just select this particular key. Want it to kind of, let's see, let me zoom out a little bit more. Let's take a look at what's happening. We can modify some of the curves and modify the Bezier. Let's see, do I want to just kind of tweak that a little bit? Let's see, let me go ahead and add another key here. Nice thing is you can add a key with middle mouse button. I like to right click manually, and we'll slow down this ramp a little bit. There we go. So we've got like kind of another key right here. Now our focal length might need a little bit of tweaking, but it's fine. This is again a demo, so we're messing with our curves here. Personally, I would dock my sequencer curve right there, and let's go ahead and hit play. And it's starting to slow down to nothing. Perfect. All right. So let's recap quickly. What did we learn in this particular video? We learned how to set up our scene. We learned that I forgot that a Cine camera was already in the scene already from when I was actually prepping this for you guys. Whoops, my bad. I was like, wait, did I make a copy of the Cine camera? Anyways, we learned how to control things like aperture. We learned how to control things like focal length. We learned how to change colors on the icons. We learned how to navigate the screen. We learned what the toolbar does. We learned what the playhead does. We learned how to control the scale for our scene. I'm holding down control and scroll here, which moves the playhead as well, but you get the idea. We learned how to manage our scenes. We learned how to manage sequences. We learned how to create multiple shots. This particular shot isn't really doing anything because right now, as you can see, it's lit up red because we're not actually on the head time. It's warning us. It's like, hey, this other shot that you have in this camera is not actually going to be used because it's currently not set up. Let me see if I can get that set up properly. I'm going to go back to the master here. And so we're in our master. Our shots are set up currently. Yep, here's our second shot, so we can go into our second shot. There we go. Now, as you can see, everything's kind of lit up properly because our playhead's in the correct location, but there is nothing located in this particular shot. Some people like to do multiple shots per camera. That's more or less how you would do it. So let's say you have multiple shots, or you can always break these off into separate shots. It really just depends on what you want to do. One camera should have multiple shots if you are doing it. Let's say the camera is doing multiple cuts and it's recording a similar thing. But you can also create a separate track, for example, where maybe we cut to another camera. As you can see, the playhead is not located in the right spot. So let's go ahead and go back to the master here. You can see we have two shots here. We can call this hanger 1. So we have multiple shots in this, but multiple camera shots or multiple camera tracks. So we have different tracks and different shots in this particular timeline. So we can go to this particular camera, and let's say this will teleport the camera that we have. This is still our Cine, this is a new Cine camera. So we still have our Cine camera selected. Let's go back and make sure that the playhead is on the correct location. Cool. Let's go ahead and move that camera. Come on. Oh, we're already selected. So we can go ahead and move our main camera already where we already have it selected. Okay. Now that might not update right away, but that's kind of the way that it is. I'm going to exit out of that camera here. So we can see that we have our camera set up over here. Personally, I don't like to set up multiple shots per camera, but I'll do a demo of that here in the next video. But that kind of gives you an idea for what you can do with your different shots. As you can see, now that that's updated, our new camera cut is living in this particular shot. See, we're still working hanger 1. We have two separate cameras. We can add another shot. These are the ones that were made previously. Personally, you can insert a shot or insert a filler Personally, I don't like to use insert fillers. This gets a little bit more complicated, so we can insert a new shot. Let's rename it shot 2. That's another shot that we can add to another section of the track. Cool. Move the playhead to that. As you can see, there's no information in that one, but that's totally fine. We can back up. So in the hangar, we now have access to multiple shots. We still have our original shot. Go back to the front here. Shot 2. And shot 3, which currently has nothing in it. We would have to add a new track in here. Or we can add a new camera. Add a new camera cut track. Add a new camera. And then continue to add cuts as we see fit. So I'm going to clean this up really quick. I've added a few too many cuts. I'm just going to delete that cut. I'm going to put our old cut back here so that we can continue here in the next video. Now again, all of that is superfluous information. Generally speaking, if you're a beginner, you're going to want to stick on one track. You're going to want to do multiple shots in one track, and that's going to work for you the best. It's the least obtrusive, it's the least damaging. Oh, I'm not actually looking through that camera, so let's go ahead and look through the camera cut here. Now, if you guys are wondering why this disappears periodically, that has to do with the way that the engine runs sometimes. I don't know why this disappears all the time. Sometimes when it's not loaded into RAM, it runs into issues of not showing what the camera cut is looking like in there. But that's kind of one of the shortcomings of the sequencer. I would prefer that this has something that shows what the level is doing at every time, but for some reason, if you're starting to run out of VRAM, this is going to go away. Okay, so quick recap. We learned how to use the interface. We learned how to make additional cuts. Let me go ahead and stop that and bring it back to the first playhead. Ah, see, there you go. Now they're back because we're no longer on the playhead. Let's go back to the front. Alright guys, sorry about that, lying about it being 30 minutes. I ended up taking a little bit longer to explain some of the fluff. I understand this stuff can be a little bit obnoxious. In the next demo, I'll make something a little bit more useful so that we can have an opportunity to see how these different tools can be used to make our shots work for us. And in this particular case, you see that I still have those two sequences or these two different shots. And let me go ahead and zoom to it. You see that the camera component is still the camera component that is actually running the show here. Again, it's just adding the appropriate amount of cuts for the sequence. In this particular case, if we look at our content drawer, it might be a little bit easier to understand where cinematics carries our sequences, and our hangar sequence is an entire sequence that we can build, and inside the sequence we have the master sequencer, which is already open because, well, it's in the background here, and we can see all of our shots. Previously we had some shots in here when we made the project. If you don't want those shots, you can delete their folders. Yep, don't want those shots. We can go back to sequencer. Oh, forgot to bump that down. And again, like I was showing you guys earlier, let's go into the, let's go back into here. I hate how it does that sometimes where it just kind of goes away. There we go. So there's our first cut. There's our second cut. one more thing before I call this video for now. I kind of glossed over making a new cut, so let's go ahead and actually make one here. So for example, this is currently the hanger sequence. I'm going to rename this so this is actually a little bit more readable. So this is the sequence that we're going to have in this particular hanger on this particular level that has right now 2 shots that are set up on the same timeline. Let's say I want to add a new shot track. So, for example, let's go back here. I'm going to add a new shot. These are the 3 shots that I've made previously. I'm going to go in and insert a shot, and I'm just going to use a naming convention that is already there. So it's going to make a new sequence shot. Or, let's say you don't want to make a second sequence. I'm going to go ahead and delete that sequence. I'm going to go into the actual shot itself. So this sequence contains a series of shots, which makes this incredibly useful. And each of those shots can be modified to have their own elements. I'm going to go ahead and add a new shot here. So let's see, how do I want to do that? Let me go ahead and move this track down to here. And so these are both in the hanger sequence. It's showing us where they're located. They're both shots in the hanger sequence shot. I'm going to go ahead and add a new shot by clicking shot. And I'm going to insert a shot here. I'm going to use the naming convention that it's giving me. Cool. Let's say I want to put that shot down here. So as we can see, the primary shots have scenes in them already, but our new shot has nothing in it. Let's go ahead and add some stuff to it. Sorry about that, guys. My engine just crashed. Let's go ahead and set this up again. So I'm going to make sure that this is set up to disallow cinematic control. Sorry about that, guys. Let me just go ahead and bring it back here. For those of you guys who lose something or if it crashes, you'll notice that my sequencer closed. You can either open up the master sequence from in here. Here are my shots. I probably have a shot 3 in there. Yep. You can open up the master sequence, which will open it up again, or you can do it from the cinematics up here. That should load it back up. So by default, if you create cinematics using the add master sequence, for the shots that you created by default, you will already have a camera tied to it. Watch this real quick. I don't know if anyone noticed, and I failed to mention it. Notice that Cinecamera Actor for shot 00101 is active, and it has a little lightning bolt. Now remember that said that spawned in, or that made the camera active. Watch what happens. Do you see in the details panel how those cameras change? In this particular case, what is happening is the way that the cinematic master works is if you need to make a new track and you didn't make enough tracks to start with, so remember how I deleted those tracks? What I did is unfortunately deleted the capability for me to use the same Cinecamera. So this is what I can do. This makes life a little bit harder, but no big deal. I'm going to separate that shot down there. And I'm going to, in the Place Actors panel, I'm going to make a new Cinecamera Actor. And I'm going to name this something. Okay, so it's Cinecamera Actor 91. I'm going to name this, I don't know, Cinecamera Actor Shot 3. Okay, so now in my particular sequence here, I'm going to go ahead and add a new shot, which already exists for me. But if you need to add a new shot, insert shot. I already have a shot 3 in here. And I'm going to place that down where it was before my crash. Now as you can see, it already has a camera cuts in there. I'm going to delete that just to make sure that everybody knows what I'm doing. I'm going to go ahead and now add a camera cut track. And in this particular case, I'm going to add actor to sequencer, Cinecamera Actor Shot 3. What that does is that binds the camera to this particular shot. So we're in the new Cinecamera Actor here. So as you can see, the cinematic camera is going to be, let's go ahead and scrobble that here. Alright. So our shot 3 camera is in the scene. Let's double check to make sure this is actually added as a component here. And now I'm going to convert to spawnable. What this means that, there we go. Does everybody see that little lightning bolt now? What that means is if the shot has a camera in it, that means that at this particular time, this camera is only going to be active. And as you can see, we have some overlap here. So let me go ahead and kind of move this over. Okay, there we go. This has to do with kind of our ins and outs, so no worries about that. Let me back up a little bit. There we go. And let's bring this in. Cool. So if you noticed, as we scrub our timeline here, the cameras will appear and disappear. See how the names of the cameras change? This is kind of the danger about making multiple shots or multiple levels. I'll do a full workflow of this so you guys have an opportunity to see, but generally speaking, if you need to make a new cut or if you need to make a new camera cut, I generally always encourage people to only make as many cuts as they need, which means that at the beginning we made this with what, 5 cuts? Cool, that means we have 5 cameras that are already connected to those cuts. If you need to add more cuts, because I deleted my other cuts, that makes life a little bit harder because those cameras are now separated. So it really just depends on what kind of workflow you want to do. So again, generally if you're going to create a new sequence or add another sequence, we have a master sequence right here. We don't want to add a second master, we just want to add a new level sequence. We can place it inside of this level and then get an additional amount of cuts from that sequence. But that's going to do it for this demo. I'll go ahead and slow it down a little bit. I'm going to get out of this hangar and then I'm going to go to a simpler scene so that we can kind of observe some elements and start testing out some things, and I can show you guys a little bit different workflow so you guys can understand some of it, and I can showcase some of the tools so that you guys can have an opportunity to see how you can set up different camera rigs. So this has been me explaining the entirety of the sequencer system, explaining camera cuts, explaining sequence possession, explaining what a master sequence is, and explaining everything that the camera can do. At this point, in the next demo, I'm going to streamline a few things with a workflow that I think is going to be useful for everyone, and that should be a much shorter video. I'll see you guys in the next one.